This is Mr. Smith, and this is the final lecture for the introductory unit, unit number 1 for honors economics. I just want to look briefly at international trade. We'll talk more about this later. And so I just want to look at the absolute and comparative advantage, so just this first part. So, and a good example of globalization, international trade that goes on are cell phones, smartphones in particular, especially things like the iPhone or any type of Google-related phones through Samsung. And 26% of the component costs in it come from components made by rival phone maker Samsung. You might think, oh, really? Over a quarter of it? And it's made from the same places or parts as their opposition. In international trade, there are often conflicts like this because certain countries can provide certain types of mineral value or metals or labor that can be utilized by two different companies, and it just suits both of them to, of course, make sure that they get these products at the lowest cost possible, so that way they can keep their prices at least stable and make more of a profit. Absolute advantage and comparative advantage. The evidence that international trade confers overall benefits on economies is pretty strong. There's overwhelming mathematical evidence to show that free trade, trade without barriers, international trade, countries exchanging goods and services, allocating resources on an international basis is beneficial for all. An absolute advantage is when one country can use fewer resources to produce a good compared to another country, when a country is more productive compared to another country. Comparative advantage, however, is when a country can produce a good at a lower cost in terms of other goods. And so when you compare them across the board, you'll see that a country has a comparative advantage. So the production possibilities frontiers before trade. And so this looks, for instance, at corn and oil. So corn on the horizontal axis, oil on the vertical axis. Saudi Arabia can produce 100 barrels of oil at a maximum point and 0 corn. So if they put all the resources to oil, they're going to produce 100 barrels of oil. And then if they produce corn, they can produce about 25 bushels at the maximum point. But if they're putting everything into oil, they can produce 0. It's going to be 0 at this level if they're producing everything or all the resources into producing oil instead. So they can either produce 100 barrels or 25 bushels. It can also produce other combinations of oil and corn. For instance, point C, it's producing 60 barrels of oil and 10 bushels of corn. But if we look at the United States, we can see in their situation, they can produce 50 barrels of oil or 100 bushels of corn. Or at some point in between, point C, for instance, they can produce 20 barrels and 60 bushels. The slope of the production possibility frontier illustrates the opportunity cost of producing the oil in terms of corn. So what is the cost of Saudi Arabia producing 100 barrels? Well, the cost is 25 bushels of corn. What is the cost of the United States producing 50 barrels of oil? The cost is 100 bushels of corn. So when you divide that, of course, the opportunity cost of 1 unit of oil in terms of corn is 1/4, whereas the United States, it's 2. The opportunity cost of 1 unit of corn in terms of oil, so for every unit of corn produced, it's costing them 4 units of oil, or in the case of the United States, 1/2 of a unit. Recall that we defined the comparative advantage as the opportunity cost of producing goods. As Saudi Arabia gives up the least in terms of corn to produce a barrel of oil, it has a comparative advantage in oil production. So they don't give up that much corn, only 1/4 of the units, but the United States would cost them 2 units of corn. So they have the lowest cost when they produce oil in terms of corn. And then if we look over here, the United States has the lowest cost of producing corn in terms of oil. Their cost is only 1/2, but Saudi Arabia's is 4. Since Saudi Arabia gives up the least in terms of corn to produce a barrel of oil, it has the comparative advantage in oil. The United States gives up the least in terms of oil to produce a bushel of corn, so it has the comparative advantage in corn production. So this is corn. They have a low cost of producing corn. This is oil. they have a low cost of producing oil. The graph shows the production possibilities frontier in Saudi Arabia after trade. So this is just for Saudi Arabia. So this is the corn production. This is the oil, 100 barrels, 25 at point C, 60 and 10. So if 20 units of oil is exported to the United States in exchange for 20 units of corn, the Saudi domestic oil consumption is reduced by 20. This enables Saudi Arabia to reach point D, where oil consumption is now 40 barrels and corn consumption has increased to 30. So if they're importing this, so they are, let's say they're operating at point C, producing 60 barrels of oil and 10 bushels of corn. They decide to export 20, so that brings them down to 40. And at this line at 40, we can see that they are going to be able to get 30 bushels of corn. Or altogether, they're going to have 30 bushels of corn. Since the post-trade consumption point D is beyond its production possibilities frontier, Saudi Arabia has gained from trade. Remember, in the PPF, the production possibilities frontier, this is efficiency for a country. They're able to go beyond their normal efficiency by making that trade. The whole way out to here. Remember, this is underutilization, this is inefficiency. This is considered as efficient as possible. They're able to go beyond that.